Have you ever had one of those days where you just nail it? When everything goes your way, when you fly through work, and you manage not to say, thanks you too, when the check-in agent at the desk hands you your boarding pass and tells you to have a nice flight. Happens to me all the time. Then there are those other days, when things upstairs just don't seem to be working at full capacity. When you work hard, but you feel like you're making hardly any progress. When you think of a witty thing to say at lunch, but actually only occurs to you 4 hours later when you're leaving the office. We tend to think of the notion of having good days or bad days as something that's taken for granted, that's extraneous, outside us, and outside our control. But what if I told you that the notion of whether you had a good or bad day isn't as extrinsically determined as you might think? Sure, we'll all have good days and bad days, but there are things you can do to build on those days to have a better day, and that's what I want to talk about. We'll get that in a sec. I've always been interested in the elasticity and the kind of changeability of our personality and our potential. As a kid, although I was quite shy, I enjoyed acting. I liked the idea of pretending to be this confident person, even if I wasn't that person inside. As I grew up into a gangly teenager, I stopped acting so much, but I started writing short stories. What I loved about that was that I could create a world of my choosing and dictate the perfect day for the characters. These characters were usually a thinly veiled version of myself, and whatever girl I'd fancied at the time, in an attempt to win her over, I guess. Fictional Ben was so cool, always having like the witty thing to say at just the right time, every time. Fictional Ben didn't always get the girl, though, because even the realms of fiction can only stray so far from reality. So that's a little bit about my story, and we'll share a little bit more about that in a while. But I want to tell you another story first, which I accidentally gave away by clicking to the next slide. But it's a story that I think some of you might know, and if you haven't, we'll run through it quickly. So it's one of Aesop's fables, and it's a favorite story of mine. It's about the tortoise and the hare. So the story concerns a speedy hare and a slow tortoise. Every day, the hare is saying, I'm faster than you, I'm going to beat you, let's have a race. One day, the tortoise calls that bet and says, sure, let's have a race. And they line up at the race line here. The hare is so confident when they kick off that he gets a little bit far ahead, but then takes a nap in the middle of the race. Unbeknownst to him, the tortoise, going slowly and steadily, passes the hare out and actually ends up winning the race. Why am I telling you this story? Well, as someone with the athletic ability of a tortoise, the idea of someone actually like me winning a race is pretty encouraging. Also, I had so much fun looking for these images on Google. But most importantly, what I want to do is use this story to introduce a way that our brains work. And you can think of our brains as having two systems: fast and slow, hare and tortoise. So let's talk about the tortoise. Our tortoise, slow, or reflective brain is a place where we have conscious, careful, logical behavior. It's very powerful. It's where we can do all our kind of deep work or existential crises and all that kind of good stuff that comes with it. But our tortoise is quite restricted because it relies on something called working memory, and it's a tight squeeze in there in our brain. Recent research suggests that we actually only hold 3 or 4 things in our working brain or our tortoise brain at one time. So you can think of a sticky note, roughly about that size. Then we have our hare brain, our fast brain. This is where we do the most of our thinking. It's like automatic processing and things that happen without us thinking about it. It's through our hare brain that we go through everyday life. If we didn't have it, we'd probably get run over as soon as we left the building. The hare brain does an awful lot, but it is a little bit restricted too. Like in the race, it can get a little bit overconfident, it can make mistakes, and that's what we're going to talk about a little bit. Have you ever been in the shower? Well, hopefully you have. But have you ever been in the shower and out of nowhere this kind of amazing idea seems to come to you, this eureka moment, and it comes out of nowhere? That's the result of this automatic processing happening in the back of your brain and it just popping out, right? So working in the background on this sort of stuff. Sounds great. But there's a thing called selective attention that hampers the way our hare brain works. Selective attention is basically, the world around us is complex and there's so many stimuli coming at us in all directions. Through selective attention, our brain focuses on things and blocks the rest of it out. It works most of the time, but it has its flaws. You can think of it like a spam filter for your brain. So like a spam filter, most of the time it's blocking out things about certain blue pills you don't really want to know about. But sometimes it can make mistakes. In a famous study, there's a video of people playing basketball. Some are wearing white shirts like mine, some are wearing black shirts. Participants are given a simple instruction: count the number of passes. Sounds simple, right? What they don't notice is that a person dressed as a gorilla walks right across the game. Participants in this survey, about 48 to 50% don't notice this gorilla happening. Hopefully you're paying so much attention to me that if a gorilla were to walk through, you wouldn't notice it. But let's test that. I don't actually have a gorilla prepared. That would be really cool. Maybe next time. So hopefully you've noticed that I'm wearing glasses. At some level, that's likely influencing your impression of me. Let's take a look. According to a study, or in a few studies, I think it's 43% of people believe glasses make a person look more intelligent. Over 1 in 3 think glasses make a person look more professional. And 40%, so almost like half the room if we were surveying, will consider wearing clear frames, so like no need to actually wear glasses, but doing it just for the sake of it. And I have a confession to make. I'm one of those 40%. No, that's a total lie. I'm very blind. I was tempted to like learn this off, but I had enough trouble like learning the talk, so I was just like, no, I'll be honest with you. So we're talking about like the hare and the tortoise and selective attention for an important reason. Objective reality like doesn't really exist. You're all interpreting what I'm saying, but you're interpreting it in different ways. Selective attention is the fact that we wake up and we have a subjective appreciation of what goes on around us. Our brain, like a spam filter, learns what we think is important, and it works that way. What I'm saying is that because we experience a subjective reality, if we learn how our brains work, we can make them work for us and not against us. Through selective attention, we can take what is inherently a bug in our human system, to use computer science words, take this bug and turn it into a feature. So something that is like not perfect about us, but make us into something that can actually work for us and be a benefit. That's what I'm going to talk about. I'm always ahead of myself on this. So when I was in college, as was kindly mentioned, I was thinking about this stuff a little bit. But I was in college, I didn't really have to worry about any of this stuff. For the people in college at the moment, like, it's pretty great. It's all kind of downhill from there. It's all right, but you just don't have the time anymore. So in college, I studied law and business, and I was working on about a 12-hour week if I went to all my lectures. Sure, there were times I worked hard, though, right? There were days when it was like 12 hours a week, 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, for about 2 weeks a year in May when exams came around. The rest of the time, I could take it pretty easy. That all changed in the space of summer when I joined what at the time was a small but fast-growing startup based out of San Francisco as one of the members of the Dublin team. We started in a one-room office, I'd say about 10% of the size of this one, and it was pretty intense. Like, it was great. Hello, colleagues in the audience. It was really, really good. But it was tough. I'd gone, as I said, from these 12-hour weeks to 12-hour days. I didn't really know what I was in for, but as Sheryl Sandberg talked about when she joined Facebook, which at the time was like a small enough startup itself, when you get offered a seat on a rocket ship like this, you don't ask which seat, you just get on. So it was great, and it still is great. They haven't managed to get rid of me yet. But I had this one episode where things changed. You know, most times I'd come into work in the morning, I'd leave a bit late, I'd come home, I'd watch a Netflix episode or 7, I'd go to bed and I'd wake up and do it again, and weekends were kind of just recovering from the week. It was a Wednesday, and you know, it had been a tough week, and I was staying in late to get something over the line. There were a few others staying as well, so we were at dinner, and it being a tough week, decided to treat ourselves to a few beers. I took a swig or two out of my beer and probably got about halfway down when, because I have a tiny bladder, like I actually have to like go to the bathroom. On the way there, I kind of like stumbled a little bit, swaggered, not in a good way, and my brain started like fading in and out of consciousness, and I felt like I was going to pass out, and eventually slumped against the wall and was found a minute or two later. At the time, I was like, Ben, you mess. It's like Wednesday. How are you drunk at work? But I'd barely had half a beer. Now, I am a total lightweight, but I can usually have 3 or 4 when something like that happens. I found out later that it was just total exhaustion from like overworking myself and not knowing my limits. The team were great both then and afterwards, but you know, like coming home later that night, I was like, Ben, you're 23, you can't live like this. But what could I do? Like, what should I do? Then I had this moment, and this like voice like boomed apparently out of nowhere. Where do you want to go? And it was such an interesting question. Where do I want to go in my life? Like, where do I want to do? Where do I want to go? What do I want to do? Then I heard that voice again. Listen, pal, I have no idea what you're talking about, but we're at a junction, and do you want to go left or right? Like, where do you want to go? So maybe it was like that I wasn't thinking about my harebrain. Maybe because I forgot that I got bundled into a taxi by like my friends in work. But I was there having this existential crisis out loud in the back of a Dublin cab. In fairness to him, he didn't have a clue what I was talking about. I didn't have a clue what I was talking about. I still cheer myself up by times by thinking about what must have been going through that guy's mind with this crazy 23-year-old looking probably 14-year-old in the back. I had no idea what I was talking about, but I figured I could have an idea if I thought about it a lot. So I sat down, I reread all my old behavioral psychology books that I'd looked into in the past. I reinvigorated this app that I've been working on, this kind of mental well-being thing. I reread more books, and I started to experiment. So I fully realized the importance of morning routines thanks to Tim Ferriss's podcast. Ferriss asked his guests what the first 60 to 90 minutes of their day looks like. And even though they were relatively idiosyncratic, there were some commonalities. First, they actually had a routine, which to me was a revelation. But there were things like meditation, journaling, exercise, and eating well that seemed to contribute to all these successful people. My morning routine, if you could call it that, was pretty horrendous. I'd wake up, roll sideways in bed, not even getting up, and scroll on my social media news feeds, dissecting the fake filtered lives of people I'd met in Santa Ponza in 2009. Which I don't really care about, no offense to the people I met in Santa Ponza in 2009. Then my own happiness, determined somewhat by the number of likes on my latest Instagram, would stumble out of bed, try and find some clothes that weren't smelly. I was new to living out by myself. Pull out whatever food was in the fridge if there was any, and then make my way into work, already kind of behind on the day before it even began. These days, I'm not going to launch into some I do 10-mile runs and drink freshly squeezed pomegranate juice, but I do a lot more in the mornings, and it requires less processing from me. The trick was I came across this thing called a when-then plan. It's more formally known as an implementation intention, but I like when-then because it rhymes. The idea behind a when-then plan is that it takes the sort of decision fatigue away from your brain. So like we said earlier, your brain can only handle so much at a time. What it does once you develop a routine is set up a sort of a ladder or a flow, a sequence of events that, when following it, makes things really easy. So when you do thing A, then you will immediately do thing B. When you do thing C, thing D, and the rest of the alphabet. And it's not just the rhyming of when then that's good about it. It's also been shown in over 200 studies that these sort of plans or routines makes it 3 times as likely for you to achieve your goals. Or so you can use a when-then plan to build in something if you want to exercise in the morning, if you want to actually journal, which has been shown to be super productive, if you just want to eat well. This for me is an absolute game changer. So let's say I've totally convinced you, you'll wake up tomorrow morning, you'll have your when-then plan, by the end of the week you'll be sorted. That's great, but life's been pretty easy so far, because it's all been directly within our control. Things change a little bit once you get outside the house. Okay, so hopefully you put on a nice podcast or playlist on the way into work. Maybe you have a commute like mine where I get to walk down Grand Canal. I'm still pretty happy, things are going well. Things are different when we're like our friend here and we're in work. These days, we're thrust into a busy world of distractions and being pulled in all directions. The word business and busyness seem synonymous these days, but that's a fallacy. All these distractions feel good though, right? They're constant dopamine hits for our brains, and every ping, Slack, and email brings with it the premise of a potential reward. It might feel good, but we're actually doing less and we're doing it less well. Let's take an example. You're in work, you have a big presentation to do that day. It's Q2 strategy and other words students will learn about when they graduate. You have that to do today. And you're working, and you're slowly, you've had your coffee, you're warming up and getting into it. And then you get an email. Maybe on your second screen if you work in tech. That'll pop up, you'll take a quick look at it, scan it, and then get back to what you're doing. You haven't even responded to the email, you just kind of looked at it. Do you know how long it takes you to get back into the train of thought or the flow state you're in? About 15 minutes. So every time you get an email, and if you get a Slack message, it's slightly better, it's about 10 minutes, but still not so great. So it takes you 15 minutes to get back into the train of thought or the depth of kind of analysis that you were beforehand. Why is that bad? Well, firstly, it takes a while for you to get into these kind of flow states or these deep thinking and bits of work. But it's also that for the majority of us, there's a very small percentage you can, but for the rest of us, we can't actually multitask for these complex tasks. When we think we're processing these tasks in parallel, we're actually rapidly switching between things. And as we mentioned earlier, our tortoise brain gets tired very easily. So it's powerful, but it's a bit lazy and it gets worn out very quickly. What's the solution? Well, there are a number of things. But it generally comes under the umbrella of focusing on effectiveness rather than efficiency. You can batch tasks, which is like doing similar things together to reducing these multiple processing points. You can use the Pomodoro technique, which is like rapid bursts of work with frequent breaks. Or you can do what Cal Newport calls deep work, scheduling this time for yourself away from distractions. I've tried all of this stuff and more, and some of it's useful and some of it's not, and some of it's down to you, so I'd recommend just generally exploring into this area. I have come across one thing, though, that I've been developing for the past few months that I'd love to share with you. And I've tried this with a few people, and so far the feedback's been overwhelmingly positive. I'd like to share it with you today. I call it sticky productivity. Now, I wanted, you'll notice by the X, call it posted productivity, but posted is a trademarked term, and I can't use it or else I'll get sued. I do think sticky productivity is better, though, because it really does make it stick. I'll talk you through it, and I have loads of post-its, or definitely not post-its, non-branded sticky notes if you guys want to come up to me afterwards. So when you come in the morning, most people write to-do lists, which is super great. I'd say do that definitely. But I'd recommend doing like a brain dump. So taking everything out of your brain and putting it down. Anything as important as that Q4 strategy or whatever it is, or to something as small as like book that dentist appointment, which I still need to do. Put it all down in like a notebook or whatever you want to use. But then pull out like the three or four things that are both urgent and important that you need to do today. The things that if you only did those things would make the day successful, and you could leave work in 2 hours, that'd be great. Maybe check with your boss before actually leaving in 2 hours, but you know what I mean. Why the sticky note? Well, A, it's like pretty cheap, B, it's pretty versatile, but most importantly, if you remember from a few minutes ago, that's conveniently the same amount of like space that our tortoise or complex brain can handle. So 3 or 4 things, and don't cheat by like writing in really small like letters, like normal size letters, which I did the first few times. Normal size letters like on the sticky note, and keep it on your laptop or keep it with you, and focus on those things. So I've talked about morning routines, how to try and get set up well for the day. I've talked about things in work to try and make yourself more effective rather than efficient. The natural conclusion is to talk about the evening routine, but honestly mine is still pretty terrible. I do come home and still watch, maybe not 6 episodes, but maybe like 3 or 4 of Netflix. That's okay. I'm still working on this, and I'd love to speak with people afterwards. But generally, what I've been thinking about for my evening now is using it as an opportunity to reflect on the day that's come before us and look forward to the day that's coming ahead of us. So our life is a series of successive days, and we see improvement through successive improvement over a daily basis. But again, I'm still working on it. I definitely don't have all the answers. So I've talked about quite a few things over this time, and we're coming to an end now, so I want to leave you with just a couple of things. If you're going to remember like 3 things, it's going to be this one. We can hack our harebrains by using selective attention to our benefit. Remember, the way we interpret the world is subjective, so we might as well interpret it in a subjectively positive way. Secondly, focus on effective over efficiency. And I personally recommend sticky productivity and definitely not posted productivity. Sticky. Finally, and most importantly, beware of people wearing glasses. They're probably not as smart as you think. Thanks so much.